Why, hello there. I'm sure you're all wondering why I called you in here today, and that's because there is a big, scary, hairy man right behind you holding a knife. Just kidding, it's because it's time for Groovy Grab Bag Volume 19. The way this show works is that every month I listen to between 30 and 40 albums, and I rank them based off of my enjoyment of them from worst to best. Every episode I feature at least one full studio album discography. Those are what I call my artists of the month. There's also recommendations and suggestions from fans, friends, family. This month is Spooky Month, although I'm not sure if this is actually gonna post in October knowing my fucking filming schedule and everything with me being in a band now. Which means this is all the albums that I listened to during the month of September that I'm filming now for the month of October. We're also going to feature a couple of recent releases because I try to keep up on the really popular new releases. The artists of the month for this month are legendary goth metal bands Typo Negative and Evanescence, as well as atmospheric black folk metal weirdos Agalloch. I got a lot of ground to cover and my hair is bound to shift positions many times throughout this video, so let's get this started. Unranked, Origin by Evanescence. I know that a bunch of you heard that name Origin and you thought to yourself, oh great, we get to look at the butthole. Don't worry, no butthole, not yet. So I originally covered Evanescence back in 2015 for my old, stupid, that guy with the glasses type of review show called 2 Beats Plus. And I was asked to re-explore the discography of Evanescence. Since it's been about 10 years, we've had 2 additional studio albums, and my review process has changed quite substantially. Now, Evanescence is one of those bands that I listened to a lot growing up, so most of this was tickling a bunch of nostalgia bones for me. I used to have some really garbage taste in music. I used to be a John Mayer and Nickelback apologist. And Evanescence is one of those bands that has stuck around in my memory, but also I don't consider them to be one of the greatest bands ever, just a somewhat positive influence on my childhood. And I will also say that Amy Lee from Evanescence is an amazingly talented singer that will be able to sing me out of the water any day of the week, and would probably be able to sing Peter Steele out of the water if that dude was still alive. The reason why I'm reviewing this and it's seemingly at the bottom of the list is because there was a lot of requests for me to regurgitate some of my opinions about the early Evanescence discography. Typically, I only include studio albums, but this was something of a studio album in the sense that it was recorded in a studio-ish sort of setting. But even Ben Moody and Amy Lee have gone on to say that this is much more equatable to a demo album than it is an official studio album. So whenever I get stuff like this, I start kind of asking myself whether or not it's fair to pit it against the rest of the albums that I review in the episode. So no, this is not getting a low grade just because it's sitting at the bottom of the list. It's just an outlier. But let me tell you that I've always had a bit of a preference for listening to early Evanescence over the stuff that came later. And part of that reason is because I really like vocals that are done with just single takes with minimal or no overdubs. Now, in comparison to the first 2 EPs that came before this does have a lot more overdubs, but it's mostly for self-harmonization than it is for anything else. Another cool little element of early Evanescence, and this is something I never pointed out in 2 Beats Plus, is the fact that this is actually a lot more electronic than what we would come to know Evanescence as. I wouldn't be surprised if listed among Ben Moody's influences is Type O Negative. That's how much industrial elements are in here. But also a lot of that came because of the limitations that the band found themselves with, not having a regular full-time bassist and drummer. In some ways, I almost kind of prefer this because it's not so overproduced and so overblown, which is a frequent criticism that you're gonna get from me with some of these upcoming albums. It is really nice hearing Amy Lee singing and just being able to still sound amazing despite the fact that she's not overdubbing her voice 6 or 7 times to make it sound stronger. The lyrics can be pretty teenager-esque, and hell, that's an issue that works itself into Fallen as well. And while you can hear how masterful of a musician Ben Moody is, he's not exactly in his prime here. So I wouldn't go as far as to say that this thing is an all-time classic, but it is an interesting listen, seeing as to where the band would end up later. And I also really respect Amy Lee and Ben Moody for even to this day encouraging the tape trading for this and the first 2 EPs in order to avoid fans having to fork over hundreds of dollars to listen to them. And while this doesn't get an official ranking, I will say that if you're into Evanescence, this is worth checking out. And now let's start the countdown proper. Over the course of the past several decades, Type O Negative fans have had quite the frustration with a certain type of censorship. Peter Steele's original vision for this album has been jeopardized time and time again because nobody has the bravery and the integrity to show us the original album cover. Well, let me tell you, Type O Negative fans, today is the day that ends. Cancel culture is over. We shall finally have, in all of its glory, the original album cover for... What do you want now? Oh, damn it. Alright. Hold on, guys. I gotta take this. It's my producer. Hello? What do you mean I can't show the Butthole album cover? Yeah, I know. We're gonna get demonetized and age restricted if I show it. Ugh, fine. I'll show the alternate album cover, okay? Just stop calling me in the middle of these episodes. This is the second time you've done it. Sorry, guys, the fun police arrived and told me that I have to show the alternate album cover, because apparently we have the integrity of Walmart up in this bitch. Number 36, Origin of the Feces by Type O Negative. 'Twas the year of our Lord, 1992. Type O Negative had just released their first album, Slow, Deep, and Hard, the previous year. Having sold an impressive number of copies, at least for an early Roadrunner release, the record label wanted Type O Negative to give them a follow-up now and not wait for the next album to come out when it was ready. So, under immense pressure and incredibly frustrated, Peter Steele decided to slap together a bunch of re-recordings of Slow, Deep, and Hard material, make it sound like a live album, add in a bunch of audience sound effects and fart noises throughout, and even at one point, a fake bomb threat being called in. You have one hell of a troll album. Of course, it's called Origin of the Feces to troll Roadrunner, and also Peter Steele decided to take a picture of his own hole and then call it the album cover, and then dozens and dozens of retailers wouldn't put it on their shelves unless they changed it to this thing. Okay, now that I'm not joking anymore, I'd much rather look at that than Peter Steele's asshole. If you want my opinion about this album, it's not really as much bad as it is just kind of boring. After you get the joke, it just kind of gets old and then keeps going. You either have the sense of humor to be on the bandwagon for this thing all the way through, or you just kind of get sick of it by the midpoint. And while Hey Pete is an interesting take on Hey Joe, for the most part, but these are all songs that are done way better on Slow, Deep, and Hard, and I'm not even a big fan of Slow, Deep, and Hard to begin with. Luckily, this was the last major taste we ever got of edgelord Peter Steele, but this is probably the lowest point for Peter Steele and company in general. C-. Number 35, The Serpent and the Spear by Agalloch. Agalloch is one of those if you know sort of bands. The best way to describe them is like a fusion between post-metal, black metal, and folk metal. Look guys, I'm sorry, but as much as I loved the vast majority of Agalloch's discography, this thing was recorded while the band was in the middle of potentially breaking up and then eventually breaking up. And you can tell, everyone just kind of walked in here, phoned in their performance and left. Sure, the musicianship is still pretty stellar, but for me, great musicianship doesn't necessarily make great music. It can stop it from sounding like a train wreck, sure, but there's gotta be some level of passion behind it. And if you're one for mechanical precision, you're probably gonna like this just as much as you did the prior Agalloch releases. But for me, even though I listened to this thing 3 times, I can't tell you a single moment off of here that I genuinely enjoyed or hated. And that makes me sad, because this is one of the greatest metal bands that I've ever heard. Very fucking consistent. Look, I don't like wasting too much time on albums like this where I don't have a whole lot more to add. Every discography has at least a couple of albums like this where my commentary is just meh. I've heard worse and I've heard better. C. Number 34, Synthesis by Evanescence. The first proper Evanescence album that's ranked here, and one that I will actually say was my least favorite Evanescence album. Least favorite because even this one gets at least some praise from me. So, one of the most frequent criticisms that Evanescence gets is the fact that it's constantly drenched in so many gothic choirs and string arrangements, and it tends to make it really hard to fixate on the cool sounding riffs and even at times Amy Lee's own voice. So in order to really prove to the world that Amy Lee is a great composer, which is something that I'm not going to dispute at all in this video, Amy decided to release under the Evanescence moniker what is effectively a solo composition and electronica album, with maybe some light touches and inputs from other musicians within the band. And strangely enough, it's the least effective of the lot. It's not that any of this is bad, it's just a lot of it's pretty forgettable. There's certain songs on here of whom, like, the versions that are on this album just don't do as well as the original album versions, like their original incarnations. Take Bring Me to Life, for example. As much as that song was written originally without a male vocalist featured on it, it is a song which has become so iconic, and you've heard it with the male vocalist so many times, that it not being there is weird. But on the flip side, this album also does have what is probably the best version of My Immortal on it. The original tracks on here are also not all too memorable. This gets basically what I consider to be the lowest rating you can get in my rating system and still be considered good, and that's gonna be a B-. Number 33, Soul Book by Rod Stewart. Alright, I have to go over this every month because not everybody keeps up with Groovy Grab Bag, but every month I've been listening to a shitty Rod Stewart album because I like my delicious garbage every now and then. And when Rod Stewart sucks, man, oh man, is he funny. And usually these Rod Stewart albums rank towards the bottom of the list. And while we're technically towards the bottom of the list, I'm sure you guys had noticed that this episode has no F's or D's, which was disappointing because I was hoping to get at least that much out of Rod Stewart, but no. He comes at us with this album that features nothing but soul covers, and this is at the end of a decade where all he did was cover songs. So when I saw that I had this thing lined up, I just said to myself, this is probably gonna be the worst one, because he's covering music that was mostly done by black artists. I was thinking to myself, this is probably not gonna feature any black collaborators on it. It's probably just gonna be incredibly phoned in, and no, actually this album is pretty listenable. It's not great, mind you, but after the past several months where everything's just been stinker after stinker, this actually passed the muster a little bit. He actually collaborated with some black artists on this thing, such as Mary J. Blige, who I did the whole discography of earlier this year, and her appearance on here is really fucking great. There's also Stevie Wonder, who again doesn't sing and just plays harmonica all the way through. Did Stevie Wonder just place a curse on his own vocal cords back in the 2000s? And Rod, because he hadn't released an album in 3 years, has a recovered vocal box now. He doesn't sound like he's dying of laryngitis with every note he belts out. He actually sounds controlled and, soulful. I was surprised by this thing. I didn't fall in love with it, but I was surprised. Good job, Zionist. You made me actually respect you for 5 seconds. B. Number 32, self-titled by Prick. Yeah, you're gonna get a bunch of random industrial shit thrown into this list, get used to it. So, I have a friend who is also my karaoke host named Daniel, and usually he doesn't recommend very much. Because every time I tell him whatever I listened to didn't get the highest grade I could possibly give it, he just starts saying, why did I even bother recommending you anything? So when I told Daniel that I was doing spooky music, he whips out this little notepad and he starts chiseling down a list like I was dedicating the whole month to nothing but albums that he recommended. I told him, look, I don't have that much time on my hands. I'll let you suggest 2. Now, if you're balls deep in the Trent Reznor verse, you probably recognize the band name Prick because it features one Kevin McMahon, who was a close friend of Trent Reznor's. The story goes that McMahon had done a major favor for Reznor that helped Reznor get his own name on the map, and so he returned the favor to McMahon by allowing his band Prick to release an album on his record label, as well as assist in some of the production duties. And yeah, not a whole lot of people outside of the Reznor-verse are familiar with this really mopey-ass album. Look, I don't mind mopey music. You'll see a few typo-negative albums get praise because it's mopey. But to me, it just kind of lacks a lot of that character and drive that a Nine Inch Nails album has. This is not to say it's bad. This is stuff that I would chill out to on the dance floor just fine, but it's not mind-blowingly good shit. Although I will admit that the Reznor-produced tracks do have a bit more of a punch to them. But you can tell that there's kind of a reason why these guys were just the friends of Trent Reznor rather than being considered on the same plane of existence as him. And that's why I give this thing a B. Number 31, self-titled by Evanescence. With Evanescence, you kinda gotta pick a lane. Do you want interesting compositions and memorable songs, but also to be drowning in all of the choirs and string arrangements? Or do you want more restrained production, but kinda weak, flabby-ish sort of songs? This is the second category. On one hand, I'm not going death because there's 5,000 different things going on at once, but on the other, there's no My Immortal or Bring Me to Life or Call Me When You're Sober or Good Enough on this album. Sure, the lead single Do What You Want was good enough to make it onto rock radio, but how many of us really remember Evanescence for Do What You Want? It's just more of what you come to expect from Evanescence. It's not terrible, it's not great either, but it does kind of just blend into the background as you're listening to it. And that's not what Evanescence does at their best. B. Oh shit, I completely forgot about the song Lost in Paradise. I actually really like that one. I think it's one of Lee's best compositions. I have my script down here and it just comes into my brain and then leaves, and then I forget to mention it. So if that seems awkwardly edited in later, it's because I'm lazy. Number 30, Movies for the Blind by Cage. Hi there, Corey. Yeah, I'm finally gonna call you by your name because you gave me permission to do so. So I got a couple of fans that share my videos on Reddit, and in return, I review an album that they suggest. And Corey, I love him to death because he keeps coming back, giving me albums that I'm probably not entirely going to click with. But he never complains, and I really appreciate that because also, he never really gives me anything that is, like, terrible. Although, I'll see you in New Age month, pal. Why did you have to throw a little B at me? I'm actually grateful for most of his recommendations because most of them are artists that I've been meaning to get around to listening to, or artists that I didn't even know exist, but it turns out that they're like really cool even if I don't end up loving what I listen to. And Cage is one of those examples. Cage is basically the answer to the question, what would Eminem be like if he was somehow even more traumatized and mentally ill and deranged? The answer is intriguing, if not a little bit obnoxious. Let's get the positives out of the way. First off, this dude's got mad skill. Some of the rhythms he explores on here could probably blow Eminem himself out of the water. He's also got really good performance technique, being able to kind of weave in and out of certain personas and actually sounding like downright fucking distressed and terrifying in certain places. And another really interesting thing about this album is that there are a number of like really weird claims he makes. Some of them are true, some of them are false, but what's really crazy is that the true ones are some of the craziest ones that he has. Like, apparently, he had a friend who died, tragically, even if this is crazy, as a result of smoking a joint laced with embalming fluid. Like, I'm not trying to make light of the dude's death, but that's still just fucking insane that people do that. But that's part of what this album is talking about. It's trying to raise awareness that people that end up in these positions, they're not crazy because they're deranged or sick or sociopathic. They're victims of their own environment. And that's why it's important to bring up Cage as a voice for marginalized folks, even if he's a white boy, because there's a lot of mentally ill people that felt like their story was being told through this album. Even if it is musically not that adventurous, and even if it does kind of ride the coattails that Eminem pioneered 2 years prior. Also, I know it was 2002, but goddamn, maybe you didn't need that many 9/11 references. Just maybe a smidgen less. It has its moments of brilliance, and I'm glad I listened to it. And I'm hoping maybe one of this guy's other albums is better because his fan base is really passionate, but this just gets a B from me. Number 29, Life is Killing Me by Typo Negative. You know, Peter Steele was very depressed on World Coming Down, and for good reason. And yeah, he was still very depressed here, but it feels like he's a bit more used to being very depressed by this point. So he decided to say, hey, let's try to be a little bit more musical diverse this round. And the results are a bit of a mixed bag. Because on one hand, the longer tracks on here do veer into musically unique territory for Typo. But on the other, like, the more aggressive tracks on here, like, I'm sorry, I'm just gonna say it right out the gate. I don't think the faster riffs are as engaging as the slow riffs when we're talking about Typo, because they have this sort of really unique way of writing these melodies that can take upwards of like several seconds to fully play out. That's the reason why so many people will call Typo one of the most romantic gothic bands out there. Also, this album has I Like Goyles on it, which is one of the worst Typo Negative songs. Like, first off, I can bitch about the lyrical content because Peter Steele's upset that he has a bunch of gay fans because he decided to pose nude for Playgirl. I know he's just trying to be edgy for the sake of, like, triggering people and whatever, but I don't know. There's just something that hasn't aged well about that, even in that sense. But also, musically, it's just lazy. It exists for the sheer purpose of triggering the lips. And also, this thing's really fucking long. I'm gonna go with a B on this one. Number 28, Here For It All by Mariah Carey. Mariah Carey is one of those artists that you forget exists for a good long amount of time. I mean, the last time we heard anything in the mainstream press about Mariah Carey, it was that beautiful song she did with that one dude back in, 2013? Now, her age is starting to show a little bit by this point, but Mariah makes up for it by still giving us some really good vocal performances. Because who'd have thunk using proper vocal technique will make it so that way you don't develop vocal nodes in your mid-50s. The beats on this thing range from retro stuff that are really fucking catchy and make me almost want to get up and dance, to modern tinged stuff that just isn't all that interesting or intriguing, because I just don't think Mariah Carey has the persona to pull it off. I mean, there's enough rich bitch flexing on here to make both Beyonce and Ariana Grande roll their eyes. And I don't like it when anybody flaunts their wealth. Doesn't matter gender identity, race, whatever. It gets to be really fucking obnoxious. It's another mixed bag, but it's a mostly good mixed bag B. Number 27, Slow, Deep, and Hard by Typo Negative. Man, I'm so fucking glad I listened to the 2 Carnivore records before starting with this, because this would have been really fucking confusing if I didn't. This was more or less kind of testing the waters to see what Steele wanted Typo Negative to be. The thing about Carnivore, and this is important to realize because it formed a little bit of the blueprint for early Typo Negative and some of the elements of the later albums, is that Carnivore is supposed to be satire. Really dark, edgy satire, but satire regardless. And its effectiveness is kind of hit and miss, at least for me. Because Peter Steele's brand of humor is edgy as all hell. And sometimes I agree with what he's trying to poke fun at, and other times I'm like, what are you doing here, dude? And what makes this album so iffy is that we're starting to hear the blueprint for Type O. So we're starting to hear some really excellent instrumentals. Even if the lyrics kind of make me want to put my head in a blender, at the very least I can say that we're starting to hear those slow, drawn-out riffs. But then he tries to bring back some of that fast-paced crossover thrash sound from Carnivore, and it just doesn't work. Not in this context, at the very least. And what makes this really unsettling is that there are some murder fantasies on here, and yes, I know that by listening to metal, I am subjecting myself to ex-girlfriend murder fantasies all the goddamn time, especially if the vocalist was cheated on or abused or something like that. And that was the case here because Peter Steele claims that the woman was not faithful to him. And I also get it, would you rather them be singing into a microphone about it rather than actually committing a violent act? And my response is, that's like punching a hole in the wall and saying, you're lucky that wasn't you. I'm not saying that Peter Steele didn't have a right to be angry. I'm saying that the anger feels very improperly and poorly channeled. Luckily, this was kind of a one-time deal, though, because even Steele himself felt pretty uncomfortable in later years with what became of him during this era. And that's just gonna be what it is with me. I have my particular sensibilities, and sometimes that's gonna tinge an album in a negative light for me. But it's still got some really great qualities that make me give it a B. Number 26, Am I the Drama by Cardi B. Now, Cardi B has been out of the spotlight for the last few years, and it feels like this album was kind of thrown out there to remind us that she's not dead. She's just taking constant mental breaks, which is justifiable. But she would put out the occasional single, which would eventually get slapped onto this album. And I don't know what it is about like modern albums, like this was a problem with that Playboi Carti release earlier this year too, where it was like 30 songs and 70 plus minutes long, and only maybe about a third of the songs actually hitting. Although I will say I liked this album substantially more than I liked the Playboi Carti release, because this album has a lot of moments of vulnerability that I really appreciate. But I don't know, somewhere buried underneath this mountain of a bunch of songs is like a very solid, if not masterfully done, 35 to 40 minute long album. Because so many of these just kind of float around and don't know what the hell they want to do. But the ones that have focus are just absolutely great. But choosing to end the album on wet ass P-word was certainly one of the decisions ever made. Not because it's a bad song, but because it's just a weird song to end an album on. I don't know, man. I gotta listen to Invasion of Privacy, because apparently that one's an actual unabashed classic. This is a B. Number 25, Street Cleaner by Godflesh. Look, usually universally beloved classics that don't completely mesh with me get at the very least a B+. Sometimes there's universally beloved classics that I just don't completely click with at all. I have to acknowledge the importance, and I will, and that gives it a whole bunch of brownie points and makes me place it probably a bit higher than I actually want to, just out of sheer respect. But this thing came out in 1989. Let me tell you why this is so important first off. Godflesh is one of the very first industrial metal bands out there. I mean like actual like fucking shredding ass guitar, much more hard-hitting lyrics, basically making regular ass industrial rock music look like a bunch of pussies in comparison. It was so impactful that some people will claim to this day that Trent Reznor altered the sound of Nine Inch Nails between Pretty Hate Machine and The Downward Spiral because of Godflesh. The problem I have with this thing is that it's so mechanical. And the production, because it's 1989, it sounds so soft around the edges. It feels like it's lacking that punch that I like so much about modern industrial music. And I get it, it was made on a low budget, and sometimes it's gonna result in you having to expand your horizons a bit in your imagination. And some people think this thing sounds menacing regardless. And that makes me sad, but you know what? We're all allowed to have those classics that we disagree with as long as we acknowledge that they're important, right? You guys are still typing your essay-long comment about why I'm wrong, aren't you? B. Okay, we're done. That's probably going to be my most controversial take in this whole video. There's no way in hell that I have any other albums listed here that's gonna get me grilled in the comments. Let me just see what I have up next. Oh god, motherfucker. Number 24, Enter the Wu-Tang, 36 Chambers by Wu-Tang Clan. Oh goody, what is consistently ranked as one of the, if not the greatest hip-hop album of all time. I've gotten request after request after request for me to review this thing because I liked Public Enemy and I had a lot of really important stuff to say about It Takes a Nation of Millions to Hold Us Back. I like J Live. I have an appreciation for underground hip-hop. So I've had people in my comments section say, hey, buddy, how about you review Enter the Wu-Tang? And I haven't for the better part of a decade because I struggle with this thing. And I'm a white boy. Look, I'll do my best, okay? But my commentary is gonna be flawed regardless, and I hope that you guys can forgive me at least a little bit in the comments, okay? So first off, this thing is historically important. It is the reason why a lot of that underground hip-hop that I enjoy so much even exists to begin with. Because the concept of underground hip-hop was basically null and void before this album came out. This album was made on a shoestring budget with a bunch of really charismatic characters, and some really revolutionary lyrical ideas. This was the start of hardcore hip-hop. It had some really violent imagery. It also introduced nerd fan bases into the world of hip-hop. And I will say that the rappers that are featured on here have a really strong rap game. Like, I fucking love Method Man and Old Dirty Bastard and GZA. Or is it Jizza? I don't know. I've heard both. The problem with this is because it was made on such a shoestring budget, it does have a very quiet volume to it. The beats aren't necessarily bad, they're just kind of creeping along, because the whole idea is that it wants you to pay more attention to the MCs. And while the MCs are all great on here, I like all the elements of the music to be very active because I'm a bit of a maximalist. Yeah, that production just doesn't do it for me, fam. It makes it a bit of a chore to listen to this album every time I have tried. I understand that the lyrics on this thing are supposed to be allegories for having grown up in poverty in urban areas. I understand that these are people basically venting out their frustrations through these metaphors, and I respect that. It just doesn't do it for me, and that's kind of part of the reason why I haven't reviewed this after all of these years. I'm gonna have to go with a B. Number 23, Rabies by Skinny Puppy. After drowning in literally all of the industrial music, I get yet another industrial recommendation from the other guy that shares my videos on Reddit. The guy whose display name is constantly changing. I don't know what to call you, buddy, but I appreciate your comments every video. You could have given me literally any other Skinny Puppy album. I am a Skinny Puppy version, and I know that that line out of context is going to get me put on a government watch list. But you had to give me the one with Al Jurgensen on it, which is also a really divisive record because it's the first Skinny Puppy album that features a lot of guitar on it. Yeah, back in the late 80s, featuring guitar on your industrial rock album was a good way to get people bitching at you, because it was all supposed to be, all of the drum machines and the synthesizers and pre-programmed beats on computers, man. God forbid you want to put like a single live instrument into the mix, right? And sure, these beats are plenty of fun, and I was able to pump my fist up in the air here and there. I'm willing to vibe to it at goth night at the local Surly Wench pub, and that's all that matters at the end of the day, even if it's not mind-blowing. B+. Number 22, Retaliation by Carnivore. My less favorite of the two Carnivore records. So, for the uninitiated, prior to Typo Negative existing, Peter Steele was part of a crossover thrash metal band called Carnivore. It's a lot more aggressive, a lot more Metallica-esque than anything that Peter Steele would do later, and the lyrics were purely edgy and satirical, with mixed results. The problem with this one isn't like who he's poking fun at, more along the lines of this satire doesn't feel as purposeful as the previous Carnivore record. It just feels like he's amping it up to 11 for the sake of amping it up to 11. Oh, also, this just sounds like a typical thrash metal record. Sorry. Like, I don't got much else to say about the style of this record. I mean, you're still gonna headbang to it to the point where you're probably gonna have neck cramps the next day, and that's all that matters for a lot of people. But I don't know, man, that's satire. Man, Peter, don't just tell me you have explosive diarrhea. Tell me how that explosive diarrhea is, like, representative about the existential state of humanity under capitalism or something. Do it, Steele. Do it. What's that? No? You're just gonna record yourself for a full track dry heaving into a fucking toilet? Oh, and also, of course, this is the one that has the sampled Hitler speech on it, which again, I get what the satirical message is supposed to be, but I'm still, at the end of the day, listening to Hitler in the background, and that just creates a sense of unease. I'm gonna go with a B+ on this thing. Number 21, Dead Again by Typo Negative. This is the final album made by Typo Negative. Released in 2007, this album does have quite a few of the same issues as Life is Killing Me, but I think that it has a bit more of a pip in its step than that previous album did. Some of these slower and longer jams are probably some of the weaker long jams in Typo's catalog, but I would say that it's still a mostly enjoyable album. I don't have too much to say about these later era Typo albums because in many ways they're just more run-of-the-mill Typo, and also just that fucking length, it's just way too long. Sadly, this was also the last recording that we ever got of Peter Steele that wasn't in a live setting. After touring for Dead Again and after a couple more years of taking a break, he would ultimately die as a result of some cardiac problems that still hard to make sense of exactly what happened, as some sources say it was probably because of his habits, but other sources say it was probably a combination of his habits as well as his hulking stature. But regardless, the world lost a legendary talent in the name of Peter Steele. But it's not a terrible note to go out on. I've certainly seen artists go out on way lower notes. Tim Buckley, B+. Number 20, The Open Door by Evanescence. At this point, Ben Moody is entirely out of the picture. After fussing with Amy Lee over the direction of the band, Ben determined that Evanescence had definitely become her puppy, and to avoid making himself and Amy miserable, he decided to part ways in 2004, I want to say, right in the middle of the tour. And he took with him all of those commercial sensibilities that Amy Lee would continue to lean into for the rest of the band's existence. This definitely does feel much more to Amy Lee's liking than any other Evanescence album. I say that because apparently in the middle of production for Fallen, Amy wanted to drench things in even more like gothic choirs and string arrangements than what was already there. And now that she had more creative control and Wind Up Records trusted her sensibilities, she really went all out on this. And I want to make it clear, these are really complex arrangements. They are impressive in that regard, but they are definitely a lot. Which sucks because some of these songs are just so goddamn good, like Call Me When You're Sober. And I definitely appreciate the level of wrath and rage on this album because, I mean, if you had to put up with Sean Morgan for more than 2 seconds in your life, you'd probably be pissed off too. And an alcoholic Sean Morgan on top of that, of the legendary South African rock band Seether. Yeah, when was the last time you heard about Seether, right? But even though it has those issues, I do gotta give credit to a lot of these songs for being as powerful as they are. I mean, listen to Lithium and try to tell me that you don't feel yourself at least swept up a little bit. And then we have the closing song, Good Enough. A song that I would say is a true masterpiece because it's emotionally vulnerable and the strings don't overpower anything. It's just Amy alone at piano, singing beautifully, probably better than I have ever heard her sing on any other track. And it's just this song of finally feeling good enough for somebody after feeling so much insecurity in yourself. And that's where I'm gonna say that The Open Door has its moments, but that production just overblows it, especially with that brick walling. Dear Mother of God, B+. Number 19, Nocturne by Der Weg einer Freiheit. Now that I've made every German watching this video fucking cringe with my American accent, I can talk about this album. I have an online Austrian friend named Jules, who really likes to talk to me about music, but her taste is, let's just say that she really likes her extreme metal genres and maybe a little bit of hardcore punk here and there. And I do like me some extreme metal, I'm just a picky motherfucker. Well, I told her she should recommend me something for once since it's spooky month. And this is what she threw at me, some obscure German bands that I had to do a lot of research on to make sure I properly categorized. Black metal / post metal. So because this is post-metal, it does have a lot of influence from post-rock, in that it has these long instrumentals that are just actually surprisingly soft with clean vocals, some tremolo-picked guitars, a lot more in common with most post-rock than most other post-metal that I've heard. And I'll get swept up in those compositions and I'll be all like, okay, Jules, this is a nice listen. Thank you for... Oh, god damn it, I just forgot that this thing is partly black metal and I fucking struggle with black metal. Oh, yup, 1 second will be, swept away in those nice little orchestral moments, and then the next it's just being, fucking thrown into the pit with the blast beats and, the huge amounts of reverb and the screamed vocals from hell. Yeah, go figure, this band goes from Godspeed You Black Emperor to just Emperor. Look, it's one of those stylistic things I'm never gonna fully understand. It's so overwhelming, it's hard to keep up with. For me, it goes in one ear and comes out the other. Trust me, these guys are worth listening to, especially if this sounds right up your alley. B+. Number 18, Fallen by Evanescence. This is the big one. The album that is considered a modern rock classic in at least a handful of circles, and a relic of the 2000s in many others. This album had a somewhat tumultuous making in that Ben Moody wanted to cater a bit more to the mainstream rock crowd, and Lee wanted to take a few more risks by dousing everything in a whole bunch more choirs and orchestras. It really is surprising that this is actually the album on Restraint with exactly how much of it just contains those thick-ass arrangements that I thought were elements that Ben Moody added into the mix, but it's actually Amy Lee's intent. And look, we gotta give credit where credit's due. That's coming from actual classical technique that she was trained in from childhood. And I grew up with this album. I remember 14-year-old me spinning this constantly. I would listen to songs like My Immortal, and that one song, I forgot the name of it, what was it? Oh yeah, that's right, Wake Me Up Inside, featuring Mike Shinoda from Linkin Park. Yes, that was the one. You know what's surprising is Bring Me to Life was originally not supposed to have the male vocalist in it, and it was under corporate pressure that Amy Lee was all like, fine, I'll slide in a male vocalist, but he's going to have a supportive role in the song. And there are a lot of really solid-ass tracks on here. We get Imaginary, which, yeah, if you've been listening to, the demos and stuff like that leading up to this is, your 4th or 5th time hearing it. But I would argue that this album's incarnation of it is the best. And while the album version of My Immortal has that more stripped down version that came from Origin, the version that everyone knows has the full band coming in the middle, and that's always come off to me as very overwrought and overdramatic. And My Immortal is already a song that I think is just a bit too teenager coded for adult me to fully enjoy. And that is one of the issues I take with this album, is that a lot of this really is very teenager coded, and I know that was because Lee herself was just barely outside of adolescence when this thing was released. These songs have been stuck in my head for the past month since I listened to this album, because I obsessively listened to it when I was a teenager. I was that weird 14-year-old who was given a toy wooden sword by my dad, and because video games only occupied so much of my time before I got bored with them, I would start doing these little stories in my head where I would pretend to have fucking sword fights to Evanescence tracks. Yeah, you could tell I most definitely had autism, but my dad wouldn't get me diagnosed because God knows what fucking reason. But that's gotta give you some idea that this album does have a good ear for hooks and melody, and a lot of that comes from the fact that Ben Moody was obsessed with trying to cater to the mainstream audience because he didn't want to be a financial failure. Yeah, if anybody's skills are undermined on this album, it is Ben Moody's. because Moody is an amazing guitarist, but he decided to kind of nerf himself by constantly throwing in more and more nu metal elements into the mix. And that's part of the reason why this album hasn't aged the best. I feel like it's so obsessed with trying to slather us in gothic atmosphere that it doesn't slow down for a couple of seconds and let itself breathe. And as a result, it's just constant bombast after bombast, and it gets to be a little exhausting after a while. Maybe it could have benefited from a little bit more restraint. B+. 17, The Marrow of the Spirit by Agalloch. This is the first album in Agalloch's discography where I can say I wasn't completely blown away from start to finish. The front half of this album struggles quite a bit because it's trying to recreate the emotional awe and wonder that you felt during The Mantle, but also kind of catering to the post-metal crowd. And it just doesn't quite work. There's something missing from those initial tracks. But what those initial tracks lack, the back half of this album makes up for in spades. We get those huge, sweeping builds and swells that Agalloch does so well, that top-notch production. But I do have to complain a little bit about Agalloch's vocals, I'm sorry. Like, look, John Hamm is a great, clean vocalist, but he decides to do, like, these weird, harsh vocals every now and then. Like, they're just kind of whisper-screamed and it sounds almost frail. Like, I know what he's going for. He's going for the distant spirit in the forest calling out to you. But sometimes the delivery can end up sounding more like your geriatric grandpa with laryngitis yelling at you. And it just doesn't always work. And I feel like this is the first album where I really started to notice that. Agalloch are one of those bands where you really need to give them a shot if you haven't already. We're about to get to like the big 3 albums by them, but this one gets a B+. Number 16, The Bitter Truth by Evanescence. It's not that much better than The Open Door and Fallen. Like, I really had to think about it and peel back the layers before I decided that this was gonna be my hot Evanescence take. But yeah, there's a lot of production restraint on this one, and the songs are pretty fucking solid. They're not as great as they were on Fallen and The Open Door, but they're certainly better than the tracks we got off of the self-titled. I will say that for Evanescence to be this far into their career, for as many people that keep saying, wait, Evanescence is still a thing, they have maintained at least a consistent level of quality throughout their existence. None of their albums ended up in the C tier, the D tier, the F tier, but also at the same time, you're not going to see any of these going up in the A or the S tier. But hey, I gotta take that consistency, because not all artists can offer that. The reason why I liked this one so much is because I felt a lot of solidarity with it. This was the first overtly political album that Amy Lee ever made. Finally identifying herself as a feminist, because a lot of rock acts saw the impeding inevitable fascism over the horizon even during Joe Biden's presidency, and they all felt the need to speak out at the same time, whether that was Paramore or Chevelle, and now Evanescence is part of that little group. But I gotta say, these are probably some of the best lyrics that Amy Lee has ever put out there. But I feel like I had the least to complain about when it came to this. B+. Death Consciousness by Have a Nice Life. Okay, for the unfamiliar, this is basically the shoegaze album of the 21st century so far. For some people, this thing outflanks both Loveless and Souvlaki in terms of quality. Have a Nice Life is a duo headed by one singer-songwriter, Dan Barrett. Death Consciousness was recorded between 2002 and 2007 on super cheap equipment that kept crashing on them. Crashing to the point where the original masters of this recording are now permanently lost. Meaning that this thing only survives in a 192 kilobit per second MP3 rip. Look, in essence, I really want to praise this thing because it does a lot of stuff really interestingly. It's almost completely aware that the production is kind of trash quality and it runs away with it. Let me just state my big gripe that I have with it. The production is not my speed. It's way too lo-fi for its own good. And because they slather everything, and I mean everything, in reverb, for me, it just completely puts everything under this thick layer of haze, and it makes it hard for me to fully connect with it. This album is basically a very loose concept album. It was released with a massive booklet that was basically a bunch of culty ramblings that was hard to make sense out of. The philosophy of this album is everything sucks shit, so you might as well just end it all because you'll only truly transcend through death. Except, do you really transcend, or does the suffering just continue just without you now? Dan Barrett has a pretty bleak outlook on the world, and that's another thing that makes it really hard for me to connect. I don't do well with bleak. But that being said, this album does have some great moments on it. Hunter put chills down my spine. And despite its ridiculous title, Holy Fucking Shit 40,000 is an epic sounding song. I guess for me, I like my shoegaze with a bit more structure and balance, and I know that that kind of goes against the grain for some shoegaze, especially for lovers of albums like Loveless and this. But hey, I respect it if you love the shit out of this. There's definitely worse albums to build a cult around. A-. Number 14, Pale Folklore by Agalloch. This was the very first Agalloch release. Coming out in 1999, when people heard it, they were all like, oh shit, who's this cool new black metal band from like Norway or Finland or whatever? Because that's what you think when you think of a band like Agalloch. You imagine a bunch of bearded dudes that hang out in Europe. But it turns out that the truth is far worse. Instead, they're a bunch of bearded, pretentious dudes from the Pacific Northwest. This album has a lot to love. This shows us the obsession with nature that Agalloch would be most well known for. It gives us those amazing instrumental swells, those lengthy builds that they were so well known for. And while this is the one album by Agalloch that truly feels like it can be said to be part of the black metal genre, it never once completely runs away with the typical tropes of black metal. It's never at any point overwhelming, it's just completely comfortable in its own skin. And this is also the beginning of hearing the combination of acoustic guitar with this type of music. Okay, yeah, maybe there are some bands that were doing it for a while beforehand, like Opeth, but I swear the fusion is perfected with Agalloch. The one big criticism I have of this is that, again, the production is really rough. And in this case, it's because the band didn't have the funding for super high-end production. But hey, you know what? With the type of songwriting you get with an album like this, I'll take it. A-. Number 13, Self-Titled by Carnivore. See, I don't completely hate it when Peter Steele decides to be an edgelord, because sometimes he's an edgelord with a purpose and with a punch. Yeah, this is more of that typical crossover thrash, but this is probably the best iteration of Peter Steele's version of thrash metal. And also, I couldn't help but fucking laugh my ass off throughout most of this. This is completely poking fun at authoritarianism, fascism, and especially toxic masculinity. If you needed any evidence at all that he was still a feminist deep down, this was probably the biggest example of that. Just completely ripping the male ego apart. And let me tell you, this isn't just funny, this is fun. I love listening to the songs on this. If you want to put a dumb smile on your face without having to think too deeply, except when you truly want to, this is probably one of those albums that you want to throw on. A-. Number 12, Confessions of a Knife by My Life with the Thrill Kill Cult. Here we go, we're getting into the good industrial shit. This was recommended to me by my friend Jason, who is now officially a friend of mine instead of just some weirdo who appeared out of nowhere at karaoke night a couple of months ago and told me to listen to Jesse Wells. Yeah, the dude's like giving me recommendations every month now. My Life with the Thrill Kill Cult is known for their camp. They're one of those industrial bands that when they put on a show, it's all about the theatrics. The outfits, the satanic panic, and the samples. And that's one thing I will give these guys, despite how lengthy their songs are, they're a lot of fun. At the end of the day, this is just a really great album that I had a lot of fun listening to. It may not have dug that deep, but hey, I liked it. Hey. Number 11, Ashes Against the Grain by Agalloch. This is very consistently cited as the best Agalloch release. It's a constant competition between this and the one that I think is the best Agalloch album. But hey, if you're gonna choose this one, you can't go wrong with it. So again, Agalloch is really obsessed with Mother Nature, right? And usually there's like a sense of survival or a sense of kinship with nature, even if there is a lot of fearing of said nature. Ashes Against the Grain is when nature just completely engulfs you and decides that it's not going to show you any mercy. And for some people, it's that sense of horror and constant dread throughout that makes this so good. It is an ugly, intense situation. It's basically like throwing you into the middle of a forest fire and watching everything get destroyed around you as you realize that you're next and you're not going anywhere. It's hard to really gauge whether or not Agalloch are environmentalists, but it feels like this is one of those statements that says if you take Mother Nature for granted, it will destroy you. For me personally, I prefer a little bit more balance, swaying from intense to soft. This is still a fine release. I will not argue with you if this is your favorite Agalloch album. A. Number 10, World Coming Down by Typo Negative. What's that? Closer by Joy Division is too uplifting for your tastes? Is Death Consciousness just not depressing enough? Do you need so much bleakness that there's basically no hope at all left in the recording? Here you go! Yeah, no, this is probably one of the bleakest albums I have ever heard, and for good reason. Peter Steele was going through shit in 1999. Having lost several family members, I think a dog and a friend. All it takes is listening to the first 2 minutes of Everything Dies to decide whether or not you want to slog through this thing. And I say slog through in like the most complimentary way. It means that Steele pulled off the bleakness. This album works. The only moment on here that isn't utterly and completely hopeless is the little Beatles suite. What's really interesting about this thing is that not only is it sad and morose, but it's also angry. And this is a much healthier expression of anger. It's just screaming into the void, knowing full well that the void doesn't scream back. The void just swallows all of your energy. Peter Steele was very justifiably losing it. And the only way he knew how to cope was through substance use. And there is a lot of interludes on this album that are basically like sound collages of alcohol use or cocaine use. All issues that Peter Steele knew full well was destroying his body, but he just stopped caring during this era. It's hard to not almost kind of side with him a little bit. Maybe not all of us will ever be there, but a lot of us have been, where it's just been suffering loss after loss, and being constantly made aware about the impermanence of everything, not just life, but the universe itself will eventually have its own heat death. I don't know, there was always some fighting spirit in Peter despite the abuse that he did to his own body over the years. But for a lot of listeners, this was the best thing that Typo Negative ever made, even if I slightly disagree. A. Number 9, You Walk Alone by Jandek. This one was recommended to me by my guitarist, Eduardo. Eduardo has a knack for listening to really obscure stuff, and he kind of likes being a bit of a music historian of sorts, which I gotta give him a lot of props for. I mean, just recently he ordered an album from fucking Australia just because it was the first recording of a punk show here in Tucson. So I asked him, do you have anything spooky to recommend me? And he throws me this Outsider album. Yeah, Jandek is a fucking weirdo. In all of the best ways, of course. He's the type of dude who just randomly tunes his guitar to whatever feels right to him, and he'll just start plucking away at whatever random chords he wants. His vocal style sounds like Lou Reed, except if it was even more strung out than it already was. And this album was made during the era of Jandek's career where he had a blues rock guitarist that was playing a lot more straight, standard stylings. So you have this juxtaposition of Jandek's chaotic playing combined with this much more straightforward, clean approach. And the result is strangely intriguing. I'm gonna go with an A on this. Good job, Eduardo. Number 8, Bloody Kisses by Typo Negative. For many people, this is peak Typo, because it's a mixture between the romantic sweep you off your feet type of Typo Negative combined with the tongue-in-cheek humoristic side of Typo. After getting tons of claims of misogyny and hateful lyrics from the previous album, this thing features a couple of songs that decide to twist the tables a little bit. Flip those expectations on their head by writing anti-white, anti-male songs, just to prove that Peter Steele likes to trigger everybody, regardless of their political beliefs. But those songs aren't what make this album great. No, what makes this album great is that Typo discovered their love for eroticism and really thick synthesizer lines. This album is one of the beefiest albums I have ever listened to. Peter Steele is now fully embracing his bass baritone rather than trying to do that snarly dog barking into a microphone thing that he did on a lot of his thrash recordings, realizing that being able to sing well below the bass clef is like a gift from God. Production on this thing is just so fucking good, and I really like that they decided to cover fucking Summer Breeze by Steels and Crofts, because that song sucks ass in its original incarnation, and somehow Typo Negative took this lame-ass yacht rock song and just made it this big, epic orchestral piece. Look, this thing is just an incredibly solid release. A+. Number 7, Psalm 69, The Way to Succeed and the Way to Suck Eggs by Ministry. Or if you prefer to Psalm 69. Yeah, the previous 2 Ministry albums actually put the band's name on the map, and this album is in contention with those 2 as far as to which one is the best. Look, this thing is just fucking great. Everything I said about Filth Pig applies to here, but probably even better, because it's got a lot more focus to it. It's not Al Jurgensen completely drugged out of his goddamn mind. And there's a lot of anti-Bush Senior lyrics on here. Yeah, that's the thing. Whoever's president, you're gonna be getting your ass ripped into whenever Ministry decides to release an album, because Al Jurgensen just hates American hegemony in general. This is a fun, bombastic album. I end up losing a lot of extra adjectives to throw in, so just take my A+ and run with it. I really enjoyed this one. Number 6, Self-Titled by Giles Corey. This was the other project that Dan Barrett is famous for, and that it's mostly him completely solo on acoustic guitar with occasional flourishes from other instruments. It's a lot more folky in nature. And what's really interesting about this is the way it was recorded. It's a lot more hi-fi than Have a Nice Life, but also it takes some certain creative liberties, such as recording vocals with tons of reverb and then removing the original vocal performance and leaving in the wet signal, which can make it sound like Dan Barrett's ghost is the one that's singing to you. Just like Death Consciousness, this album was released with a massive booklet, which basically cataloged Barrett's struggle with suicidal depression at the time. This thing is a gorgeous album, and I would even go as far as to say that maybe with enough listens I could potentially give this an S. But what holds me back is again that fucking bleakness. I don't know what it is with me and like bleak human expression. And it's not to say that people that are in like this bleak time in their lives shouldn't be making music. It's just that I need something that brings me back down to earth. And I don't know, maybe it's because I've never really been in that completely helpless position where every day I'm, feeling that tension. But that being said, this is still a stellar release. And if you like bleak, depressing music, it's right up your alley. A+. Number 5, Up on the Sun by Meat Puppets. Yeah, I know this band technically isn't all that spooky, but I got told by my friend Marshall, you need to listen to this album. And I said, fine, I guess I can twist the definition a bit since the band's name is Meat Puppets. One of the best bands hailing from the good old state of Arizona, which is where I'm from. The Meat Puppets, you would think with a name like that they'd probably be metal or maybe punk, but no, they are cowpunk. Basically a punk band that was surrounded by so much honky-tonk bullshit that all of that energy ended up rubbing off on them. Still got plenty of that punk anti-authoritarian spirit, but with a different coat of paint, so to speak. The most impressive thing about this band is that its guitarist and bassist are really in tune with each other. And they're playing ultra fast, these songs zoom by you at 60 miles per hour. And they're playing in unison so well that you would swear that the guitarist is cheating by using an octave pedal. But you know that that's not the case because it very clearly sounds like a bass playing alongside him. And the vocals, sure, the vocals are your pretty run-of-the-mill alt-rock territory, but hey, they're serviceable. And this music doesn't really need stellar, otherworldly vocals to sweep you off your feet. I gotta listen to Meat Puppets too because I think that one's considered the masterpiece and I might like that one a lot more. But this is still a really great entry point to the Meat Puppets for me and I really enjoyed the shit out of it. A+. Number 4, Front by Front by Front 242. Fuck you, Front 242, for making me say Front by Front by Front. This is the other industrial album that Daniel recommended to me. When I hear industrial music, a lot of the time I roll my eyes because I've been to a lot of those dance nights at the Surly Wench. And sure, I can dance my pants off to those albums, and for those of you that don't believe that my pants come off when I dance, let's just say it's a good thing that I filmed this show from the shoulders up. But what's really cool about this is unlike a lot of industrial music that can just get really repetitive and clangy, this album chooses to build textures progressively over time. You're not going to hear a beat sounding the same way for longer than a minute. They'll throw in a new bass line or a new synth texture, maybe the rhythm changes up a little bit. And that's the type of shit that I like. I like those subtle changes over time. And this thing is really lushly produced. You wouldn't think that the word lush and industrial would go together, but Front 242 proves otherwise. This thing is a glistening, gorgeous masterpiece of an industrial album, and I'm glad I listened to it. It got so close to getting an S. I'm not sure what it was that was holding it back, but I'm feeling an A+ on it. Number 3, October Rust by Typo Negative. Peter Steele, are you trying to seduce me? The reason why I ask is because I put my pants back on from the previous album, but now I'm remembering this one, and let's just say that they came back off. This album is romantic. Really fucking romantic. Tragic and romantic. Morbid and romantic. Erotic and romantic. But romantic regardless. And my god, the synth pads they're playing with this thing. Oh, this could have gone Full House territory under the hands of the wrong person. But man, did they just nab the prettiest, yet also most effective synth pads to play with music like this. And those heavy riffs, they carry this emotional weight that you just don't hear in other Typo albums. Now, the humor is still there. I would say the only album that doesn't have any of Peter Steele's humor is World Coming Down, and that's for good reason. But this one only exists in like a couple of like starting tracks where you hear this stupid low hum, and then Peter Steele comes in and says, haha, you like my dumb little joke there? Yeah, let's go ahead and just start. But it all doesn't really matter because these riffs are so good, these songs are so well written, and Peter Steele is just completely embracing the gothic nature of what Typo Negative had become at the time. For something that is technically classified as extreme metal, this thing is really pretty and intense at the same time. Probably one of the best metal albums I've heard in a nice long while. S. Hey, Godflesh heads. Hey, I hope you're paying attention. Hey, Godflesh heads, look over here. Look over here, okay? I know that you guys were angry about Street Cleaner only getting a B. Here's my number 2, Pure by Godflesh. Yeah, no, this thing was just fucking great. This was my introduction to industrial metal because I had avoided Alice in Chains for decades, and then I had like this metalhead roommate that absolutely insisted that I listen to the albums he owned, and he was just like, yeah, no, you're listening to Pure by Godflesh. That thing's gonna rip your nuts off and shove them into your mouth. And when I listened to it, I was like, god damn, this thing is fucking brutal and terrifying. My god, this isn't even like the highest rated Godflesh album. And then I listened to fucking Street Cleaner, and Street Cleaner just does nothing for me. And I think it's because like 3 years makes a huge difference technologically speaking when we're talking about the late 80s going into the early 90s. But what's really interesting is that this was technically a downgrade with recording equipment, because they went from playing around with a bunch of digital devices that they had easy access to only being able to record on an 8-track tape. So the question persists, how does this thing have such a more menacing and loud master than fucking Street Cleaner does? What also helps is that this is a lot less of a repetitive experience. Street Cleaner and Pure are both very anti-capitalist, very anti-industrialist. They want you to equate your 9-to-5 experience with a horrifying reality. And it's through that repetition that they attain that. It's a little bit more musical in nature. The repetition is still there, but it feels less like a noise experiment and more like a genuine musical experience. Which is why it's perplexing that the final track is a 21-minute dark ambient piece that has no melody or any discernible musical quality, considering my penchant for hating that type of like soundscape experience, always struggling with it. But I think what works so well is that it is the final track. And it's after just beating your skull in all the way up to this point that it works so well. All of the structure in the music is gone and you're just left with these factory sounds, these clangs, these industrial noises. It makes you wonder, where the hell have you been led? It's like the album started with this madman ranting about how capitalism sucks ass, yanking your arm and aggressively pulling you into this abandoned facility of some sort. And this is like the result. Is someone chasing you? Is there a way out? Are you lost? Let me just say, this album scared the pants off of me. And in case you're doubting that, I got the evidence. One of the genuinely most terrifying albums I've ever heard. S. Okay, number 1. It's The Mantle by Agalloch. I originally listened to this album when I was trying to complete my Music of the Year 2001 series, which is still not finished, but oh well. And I was starting a 2002 listening experience, and this was an album that kept getting recommended, and so I added it to my list, and one day I decided I was in the mood to listen to a metal album, and I played this thing, and I've listened to this a lot. This is probably now my favorite metal album ever made. Even better than When the Kite String Pops by Acid Bath, even better than Dope Throne by Electric Wizard, another album that I've barely talked about on this channel. There's like no other metal album like this. And it's not a piece that feels like it fits into the slot of spooky month, because this is a very wintry album. Like, the best way I can describe it is to imagine yourself walking around Washington, like in the middle of nowhere, and it's like mid-January and it's frigid outside, and somehow you've completely found yourself stuck in the woods, and you hear nothing but the sound of your own feet crunching against the thick layers of snow. The only signs of life are like a deer or an elk off in the distance, and it stares at you cautiously, both you and the elk maintaining that distance, that respect for one another, because you both just want to survive. And rather than terror, you feel a sense of calm. Like it's a miracle that any of this exists to begin with. And you start to feel a sense of respect, doused in a lot of nihilism. This is like the sonic version of watching a Werner Herzog documentary. It has the perfect balance of the acoustic guitar textures with like the thick, distorted band textures. The instrumental swells on this are absolute fucking perfection. This is one of the few albums that feature a lot more clean vocals from John Holm. And despite the fact that the lyrics sound like it's hopeless, it's almost like it's challenging you to keep braving through the harsh environments and to survive. It's almost like symbolic in its own way. This universe is cruel. It's not always going to be easy to make it to the other side, but you should still make it to the other side, whether it be out of spite, out of sheer badassery, or what. But there's something beautiful about continuing to exist in this cruel, harsh world that we've been placed in. Usually when you hear the term nihilism, you think somebody who has no hope in the world. And then you listen to an album like this, and you realize that your view of nihilism is super simple. It says that the world is a cruel mistress, and that it's our duty to observe it and to appreciate it for what it is. But it's also our duty to survive it. And sometimes in my darkest moments, that's what keeps me going. S. And with that pretentious little rant over, that does it for this episode of Groovy Grab Bag. Join me next month when I cover basically the border fucking opposite of the stuff I've been covering this month. I'll see you guys later. Oh, be sure to like, subscribe, comment, yada yada. You know the good stuff. Catch you later.